Were you involved in a rear-end collision? How do you maximize your injury settlement? Hi, I'm Jeff Hampton with the Fulgham Hampton Law Group. Today I want to talk to you about everything you need to know about rear-end collisions. How do you maximize your injury settlement? How do you make sure you're being treated fairly? And by the way, one of the things I want to go through is answer some of the commonly requested issues that come up when people call in a rear-end, when they've been in a rear-end accident. And you need to be prepared because very often insurance companies are going to treat you unfairly if you're not prepared and know what to do. All right, now let's talk first. Rules for settlement. Anytime you want to start talking about having been in an accident of any sort, particularly a rear-end collision, you need to make sure you understand what the rules are for settlement from the insurance company's perspective. Now, in order to maximize your settlement, first of all, your settlement is going to be determined primarily by two factors. Number one, who is at fault? Obviously, if you were at fault, you're going to have to actually be fighting a claim that your insurance company should be paying the other individual for whatever injuries they may have sustained. So we're going to assume for this video that you were not at fault. Okay, we're going to assume that the other driver was at fault. So number one, who is at fault? Number two, how bad were your injuries? Now, one of the best examples I want to give on this is we're going to talk a little bit about a client of ours who had been rear-ended by an 18-wheeler. This case was unique because she wasn't actually the driver of the vehicle at the time, she was a passenger. In fact, they were stopped at a red light, and as they were waiting in order for that light to turn green, there was an 18-wheeler coming down the exit ramp, and the driver of this 18-wheeler was too busy looking at his phone, and by the time he looked up and realized that there was a red light, he couldn't stop fast enough, and he ended up colliding right into the back end of their Toyota Camry and ended up getting in a pretty serious accident. Now, it was clear from the facts that our client was not at fault and that the driver of the 18-wheeler was at fault. In fact, so much so that the police came out and they actually cited the driver of the 18-wheeler for their negligence. So our client ultimately was able to receive over a $300,000 settlement as a result of the rear-end collision. Why? How did this happen? Well, even though her injuries were primarily soft tissue injuries, as a result of what happened, these injuries were sufficient enough that she ended up having to get some type of surgery. So understand how this worked. Initially, she wasn't exactly sure how bad she was injured, but she had had some issues in the past that ended up being seriously aggravated as a result of this rear-end collision. So she ended up having surgery and follow-up physical therapy. Now, fortunately for our client, the 18-wheeler had mandatory bodily injury coverage as required by Texas law. But imagine if our client had been hit by a driver with a minimum policy that did not cover the extent of the damages that our client had incurred. In that situation, our client, we could have sued the driver of that vehicle, but if the driver has no money and they have no insurance coverage, so often, or not sufficient insurance coverage, so often many Texas drivers that have been injured end up holding the bag and they end up having no recovery or insufficient recovery for their injuries as a result of being rear-ended. Now, let's talk about a few things. How long will it take to settle your rear-end collision claim? Now, this is one of the main questions I get all the time. People call in, they want to know, how long is this going to take? Now, it's a bit of a complicated answer because it relies upon a combination of two factors. Number one, we need to look at the available insurance policy limits. And then number two, we have to examine the severity of your injuries. So I'm going to walk you through this for just a moment to give you a better feel for how long it might take. If in Texas, if the at-fault driver has low insurance limits and you sustained a minor injury, very often it will take longer to settle that claim. So low insurance limits, minor injury, it'll take a while, okay? What about low insurance limits and a serious injury? Well, usually this will involve a quicker settlement time frame. And the people say, why? A lot of people ask me, why? Why does this happen faster? Well, here's why. The insurance company knows there's a serious injury. Okay, so they know they're going to end up having to pay out on it. So what they'll do many times is they'll quickly make an offer to settle for those insurance limits, particularly if the limits are low. okay? There are many drivers that only have a $35,000 insurance policy, and if the injuries were substantially more than that, the insurance company might come right out and offer the maximum policy, okay? Number 3, what if there are high insurance limits and a minor injury? There, it's going to take longer to settle the claim. Your attorney is going to know that there is more coverage that's available, and many times that insurance company is going to fight to minimize how much of that policy limit they're willing to pay. Finally, number 4, what if you have high insurance limits? What if that at-fault driver has high insurance limits and you suffered a very serious injury? Well, this takes longer to settle the claim because it will take a long time normally to treat serious injuries to get full settlement value. Think about it. We want to make sure, any good lawyer wants to make sure that their client is fully healed. They want to go through the entire medical process, make sure they've been able to receive full medical treatment that they need, and over time, those are additional expenses that go towards the settlement claim. For instance, in the example that I spoke to you about just a few minutes ago, it took our client over 2 years to settle her claim because after her surgery, she was required to receive physical therapy, but complications occurred during that physical therapy that led to additional medical procedures that had to take place. And here's the thing, that played a major role in settlement negotiations because we wanted to make sure that our client was fully compensated for all of her injuries. I mean, think about it. Additional pain and suffering, additional medical expenses, additional loss of wages, okay? We wanted to make sure. So many times if you have a high limits policy and you have a serious injury, it's going to take longer. Now, to further illustrate why some rear-end collisions take longer to resolve, let's examine the example I've been talking to you about in a little bit more detail. Initially, here's what I want you to know. The insurance company on that claim where she received over $300,000, they only offered our client a $30,000 settlement for her injuries. Now, you look at that and go, how is that possible? Well, it's extremely common for insurance companies to lowball the offer at the very beginning, which is, I mean, it's insulting, right? It's an offer that you should never even consider. But if she had accepted their initial offer, she would have missed out on a 10x recovery. So it's important, if you've been in a car accident in Texas, if you've been rear-ended, don't just walk in there and take the first offer. Many of these insurance adjusters, they are going to want to get on the phone with you, and they're going to want you to try to admit right out of the gate, wasn't hurt that bad. Yeah, we'll take care of the property. Okay, great. We're going to give you a little extra. We'll give you 10 grand for the little pain maybe you're feeling right now. They want to do this quickly so that number 1, you don't hire a lawyer, and number 2, you may discover later that you've had additional injuries or a greater extent of an injury than you realized, okay? So by fighting the collision claim, we were also, in the example that I gave you, we were also able to attack the driver's uninsured motorist provision and maximize her recovery. Remember, she was a passenger in the car for the client that we're speaking about here, she was a passenger in the car, so we were able to determine settlement, we were able to gather settlement not just from the at-fault driver of the 18-wheeler, but also there was a settlement opportunity with the driver of the vehicle that she was a passenger in, okay? So by determining the maximum coverage available and arguing that the unpaid medical bills and pain and suffering of our client endured for a significant period of time, we were able to help her enjoy a 10x recovery from the original offer from the insurance adjuster, okay? Now, additionally, here's the other tactic that a good personal injury lawyer will take. We were able to also sit down with her and not just take a settlement of the $300,000, but the remainder of what she owed in medical bills, we were able to go and negotiate those unpaid medical bills down to an amount that equaled about a third of their original value. So that settlement amount she was able to keep more of that total settlement amount in her pocket as a result of that negotiation. I want to give you one more example for this point, okay? We represented a client who was rear-ended and suffered property damage, but did not appear to suffer bodily injury at the immediate moment of the impact. However, after several weeks, they began to complain about neck and back pain, and ultimately they visited a doctor and learned that they had severe neck damage. They had damage to their back and to their neck, and it was enough that it would require them to have a pretty decent amount of extensive medical treatment. So initially, think about what happened. right? The insurance company of the at-fault driver, they were uninterested. They were not willing to offer any type of real significant settlement amount because they argued that our client had not received those injuries as a result of the accident. They were claiming there could have been some subsequent issue that could have come in the way that would have been the real cause of those injuries. Basically, they argued there was no way to prove it. They were saying, look, you're not going to be able to prove that the surgery was related to the rear end accident that took place. In fact, here's the thing. Many insurance companies, so that you understand this, a little bit of a pro tip on this, they will routinely pay less money in settlements if you do not take an ambulance to the hospital at the time of your car accident. Now, it sounds ridiculous, but don't ever trust that you know for sure if you've been hurt or not when you've been in a pretty impactful accident, okay? Because many insurance companies will just assume, oh, you didn't go to the hospital, so you're not that hurt. And that will profoundly affect the amount of the potential settlement. Now, fortunately for the example that I gave you with our client, the client was able to show that soon after the rear end collision, he had taken some anti-inflammatory medications, his medical records indicated no prior injuries, and that he had followed up with a doctor. So the insurance company did end up ultimately agreeing to a fair settlement so that the client was able to be compensated for his lost wages, for his unpaid medical bills, and of course his pain and suffering. Now, one question I also get all the time, particularly on rear end accidents, is people ask me, they say, what if you don't have health insurance and if you were rear-ended? What are you supposed to do? Well, this particular example that we're talking about here, it's even more beneficial for you to retain an experienced personal injury attorney to help you, because you may have a hard time getting a doctor to treat you if you don't have medical insurance. And so one of the most important things is you need to get medical help. If you've been hurt, you need to get treated. But secondly, your ability to receive medical treatment is a very big factor in how much your settlement is going to end up being worth ultimately in negotiations. So good personal injury attorneys have a network of medical providers that can treat your specific injury at no cost to you on the front end. In fact, you can get high quality medical care, and the personal injury lawyer, and we do this all the time here at FH Law Group, we can roll in that cost into the part of the valuation of your settlement demand as far as negotiations with the insurance company. And this way, here's the benefit. Number one, you want to make sure you're being treated so that you'll get better. You need to heal. But secondly, it increases the value of your settlement if you've been rear-ended. Now, if you have medical insurance, here's the thing. You say, well, I do have insurance. That's fine. If you have medical insurance, it usually makes sense to go ahead and use your coverage because you'll get to use your doctor. You can make sure you get a good, fair contracted rate in order to get yourself taken care of. And many times it'll help you escape inflated medical bills, okay? Either way, regardless whether you have insurance or not, it is critical that you receive the medical help and the treatment that you need, both for your health's sake as well as for the sake and value of your settlement claim. For example, we had a client who had been both rear-ended and by a wraparound ended up being kind of T-boned or hit on the side of the car as well in a car accident. And in this car accident, it caused burns to her legs and to her side due to the airbags exploding at impact. Initially, she did not think that she had any other injuries other than the burns that she received, but her primary doctor saw her about 3 or 4 days later and determined that she actually had a torn rotator cuff, and as a result of that torn rotator cuff, she would need surgery in order to repair the injury. Now, initially, what do you think happened? The insurance company came out and said, no, I don't think that rotator cuff was torn because of the auto accident, so they would only offer her a $25,000 settlement for the injuries, which was outrageously unreasonable considering the nature of the accident. Pretty impactful accident. Clearly, the other driver was at fault and she sustained injuries. And I mean, the other driver was 100% at fault. So ultimately a lawsuit had to be filed. Depositions had to be taken of the driver that was involved in the at-fault driver at the time. And after a hearing and a negotiation, our client was able to receive a $75,000 settlement as opposed to a $25,000 settlement. And the reason why I bring up this example, this illustrates how unfair and unequal some insurance companies treat situations like this. You can have some insurance companies that will at least appear to want to consider bargaining in good faith and make sure someone's fairly compensated. And then you'll have other insurance companies who will only lowball all the way up towards a trial. And sometimes you got to continue to push those people to make sure that you are fairly compensated. Now, to wrap up this video, I want to finish this by examining the factors that can play into an insurance company agreeing to a settlement on a rear-end collision quickly. Everyone asks me, can we wrap this up quickly? Here are the factors. 4 main factors you need to consider. Number 1, was the rear-end collision a high-impact crash? Many times, the more impactful the crash, in other words, the more damage that was done to your vehicle, the worse those pictures look, the greater the settlement value will be. In other words, we need to make an assessment of the damage of your vehicle, okay? Number 2, did you go to the hospital? Remember, if you were transported to the hospital, as a general rule, insurance companies are going to be more willing to pay a higher settlement value if you've made a trip to the hospital and there are records reflecting, okay? Number 3, is the insurance company of the at-fault driver a decent insurance company? And what I mean by that is, are they a company that's willing to actually bargain in good faith? And this is something you'd have to talk specifically to your lawyer about. And I tell people this, listen, this is general advice for you. It's not specific legal advice to your situation. That's why it's critical to make sure you're always talking to an attorney, a personal injury attorney that can go over the specifics of your factual scenario. But generally, you need to identify what type of insurance company you're dealing with and how reasonable they are. Finally, number 4, are you the only person making a claim on the insurance? If there were other passengers or other individuals that were involved in the car accident that could make a claim against that available coverage, the insurance company may be quick to settle with you. So listen, I know I've gone over quite a bit here, but rear-end car accidents are just one type of car accident case that can exist. There are many other strategies that can be used and may apply to maximize your settlement for recovery in a car accident or truck accident or maybe an 18-wheeler accident. If you have suffered a rear-end accident case in Texas, and you would like to learn more about your options, first of all, I encourage you, like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this, and if you would like a free consultation, don't hesitate to contact our office. And so I'm going to attach our website onto this at the bottom of this video, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Feel free to give us a call. Thank you again for joining us here at FH Law Group. Look forward to seeing you on our next video.